Welcome back, everyone, to yet another North to South show here on the Touchdowns to Home Run show, where we talk SEC football, everything. I'm so pumped for this video today. I had a great day today. First of all, got my vaccine today, got my Moderna vaccine, so my arm's a bit sore, but I can get through it. I'm strong, I'm tough. It hurts a bit, but I'll get through it. But if you haven't already, and you feel comfortable, go get vaccinated. I highly suggest you go get vaccinated. I'm not here to tell you what decisions to make or anything, but I'd suggest it. And I'm excited that now I still got to get a second dose, but now I'll be able to go to sports games next season, which I'm going to go crazy. I'm telling you, the amount of sports games I'm going to go to next season is going to be insane. I'm going to try to soak in as much sports game as possible because if you know, I'm from Canada and all of our teams have either moved to Florida or there's no fans at the game. So I haven't been to a sports game since, I think, January 2020. It was like a Chicago Blackhawks versus Ottawa Senators hockey game, but that was the last sports game I've been to. But back to the show, back to what we're going to talk about today, because we got an amazing, great show packed up for today. Got 3 different segments. First, TJ Finley. Could he start for Auburn? That's a huge if. First of all, he needs to transfer to Auburn. We all know TJ Finley, ex-LSU Tigers quarterback, is in the transfer portal. We're going to talk some of him. See, apparently he says he can compete for that starting role with Bo Nix. So a very, very interesting topic to talk about there. We're going to go through what does JT Daniels need to do next season if he wants to win a Heisman, because a lot of people feel very, very strongly about JT Daniels going out and winning the Heisman next season. And then we're going to finish up with our best versus the rest segment, where we break down an SEC team playing an out-of-conference game. And today's is going to be Tennessee versus Pitt, which is going to be interesting because I don't know the most about Pitt, but I'm going to try my best to wrap up how they're looking this season and go through keys to win the game for Tennessee and then my final score prediction. So we got an absolute packed show today, guys. First of all, let me know if you're here in the comments. Would love to say hello. All you supporters out there, I really, really appreciate you guys tuning into this each and every Monday and Wednesday at 7 o'clock, as we always do. So really, really thank you and appreciate you for everything that you do for this channel and me personally, because I love doing this. I have a blast doing it with you guys, and I love hearing from you guys in the comment section. So without further ado, let's get into our first segment. Could TJ Finley be the starter at Auburn next season? I'm not talking week 1. I'm not talking week 2. I'm talking eventually, could he end up the season as the starter for the Auburn Tigers next season? Now, I had to put out a massive disclaimer because I got tons and tons of hate for my Justin Ross video, just even talking about that rumor. I said multiple times, Justin Ross has come out and said he's not transferring to Clemson, but the day before, there were rumors that he was either going to Auburn or Alabama. People hated me for doing that, absolutely hating me in that video. So disclaimer, TJ Finley has not transferred to Auburn University yet. It's one of his top choices right now, but as of this moment, TJ Finley is not an Auburn Tiger. So before you go at me in the comments, please listen to what I have to say in this. TJ is not currently an Auburn Tiger. He's in the transfer portal. It looks like there's a good chance that he may become an Auburn Tiger, and that's what we're going to talk about today, that if TJ does decide to go to Auburn, can he compete for the starting role? What does TJ Finley look like? Where would he kind of play in this Auburn team role? And is he good enough to be the starter for Auburn? And can he find Brian Harsin's success in his first season if Brian Harsin does ultimately choose, and TJ Finley ultimately chooses to go to Auburn, and then Brian Harsin decides to give TJ the nod in the season? Because hearing from a lot of Auburn fans, there's a lot of mixed emotions about how people feel about Bo Nix at quarterback. We know he hasn't been the greatest. He's super inconsistent, especially on the road. He's not that consistent on the road at all. So people are really, really iffy about Bo Nix at the quarterback position. Could we see a new starting quarterback this season for the Auburn Tigers if TJ does decide to go on? So let's talk about how TJ did last year for the LSU Tigers when he got his chance, because if you remember, Miles Brennan started out an amazing first 3 games for LSU last season. That was against Mississippi State, obviously, then Vanderbilt, and then they finished up against Missouri. And I'm pretty sure in that Missouri game is when he got injured. And then the next game, I remember TJ's first game was, I'm pretty sure, against South Carolina. I'm pretty sure that game was against South Carolina. So LSU decides to throw TJ Finley in over Max Johnson, who Max Johnson obviously got some snaps later in the season, obviously won a massive, massive Florida game for them. But in the total of 5 games that TJ played, if I go through, I'm pretty sure it was one was against South Carolina, definitely, Alabama, Texas A&M, and then I can't remember the other two. But he did play some really, really good, and he played against Auburn. He played against Auburn in that road game, for LSU, that was a road game. It was in Jordan-Hare, if you're an Auburn fan. He threw a total of 5 touchdowns for 5 interceptions and 941 yards. So comparing what Miles Brennan did, who I'm pretty sure after those 3 games was already he was way over 1,000 yards. I think he was at like 1,200 yards or something like that. So it was a step down. Miles Brennan was doing really, really, really well. But people had a lot of optimism about TJ Finley and what he could do for the LSU Tigers last season. Now, did he ultimately perform as or as good as everyone thought he would? No, he didn't. Does that mean he was just a freshman? Freshman coming in, 3-star quarterback out of high school, 19th best pro-style quarterback from his class. You throw him in a struggling LSU team in general. Like, this wasn't just an offensive thing. Especially there was deep problems all over the defense, but it wasn't just a defense thing. Collectively, as a whole, LSU just was not clicking like they were the year before. Might have been a talent loss issue. I still think that LSU had tons of talent. It was just they were not able to perform at all last season. They throw him in there as a freshman. He does his work in some games. He gets the win against South Carolina, but then you throw him in against some good teams like Alabama and Texas A&M, and then he gets kicked in by Auburn's defense last season. So I guess you could say Auburn's defense was also one of the better defenses that TJ definitely went up against throughout his stretch for the LSU Tigers. But I think it's a bad statement. I think it's a bad take to judge TJ Finley and everything he's done just off of these 5 games because he's a freshman. Throw him in an SEC scenario against really, really good defenses. It's going to be tough. So ultimately, what's going on, Miles Brennan and Max Johnson are battling it out for the LSU starting quarterback position. After the spring game, it was obvious that Max Johnson and Miles Brennan were kind of a step above TJ Finley. I watched and I broke down actually in the show going through all 3 of those quarterbacks film from the spring game, and you just saw TJ was a bit off. Not to say that he doesn't have the talent, but he was just a bit off. So he ultimately decides to transfer. And I'm going to talk about some of the things that I really, really like about TJ Finley. He's got the size that you definitely want at quarterback. He's not the most mobile guy in the world. He's not going to be like a Cam Newton who's going to be able to make plays with his feet and run all the time, but he's got the size that you want at the quarterback position. I love his arm strength. He's not afraid to throw the ball downfield. And I think the best part about TJ Finley, and something that you don't usually see in college football anymore, he's not afraid to throw from the pocket. He's not afraid to take hits in the pocket because he's so big, and he's not afraid to step up and hit throws downfield, staying in the pocket. That's something that you don't normally see anymore in college football. You see a lot of guys running out of the pocket as soon as they feel pressure. Even if they have a guy open, they don't want to take the set. They don't want to get hit, so they'll scramble out and then try to make a throw on the run or try to pick up 3 yards on their own feet. I think TJ has the size, and he's just not scared in the pocket. And I think that's something that's going to really help him if he does get to that NFL level, because that's something that you need as an NFL level quarterback. But in college, it's something that we don't normally see. So I think throwing out of the pocket is definitely TJ Finley's strength. Some of his weaknesses, his footwork isn't the greatest. Like, if you go back and watch, I encourage you to turn on the LSU spring game tape. He was just choppy with his feet, didn't really seem fluent at some points, and just threw off the wrong foot sometimes, which it's a work in progress. You have really, really good attributes and things about TJ Finley that could make him a really, really good quarterback. Again, his size is there. I feel like his arm is there. His release could also use a bit of work. He could release the ball a bit quicker, but those are easy things. You could fix the footwork. You can fix the release. But just mentally, the mental game of staying in the pocket, being able to stay in the pocket and take hits, and he has the physical size that you like at quarterback, I think could make TJ Finley definitely a successful quarterback in college football still, no matter about what he did at LSU. Can he compete for the role if he ultimately does go to Auburn? Can he compete for that role for the starting quarterback? I think 110% he can compete for it. Now, will he win over the role is a different story. I feel like a lot of people are going to be pushing for TJ Finley to be the quarterback, the starting quarterback at Auburn. Just hearing from what Auburn fans have told me, I feel like they just want something new at the quarterback position. I think that they're over with Bo Nix, although a lot of people will still feel very strongly that Bo Nix would be better than TJ Finley. They just feel like TJ Finley isn't there throwing yet. His footwork's not there. And Bo Nix, although he has been really inconsistent, he's still been able to win some big games for Auburn. Like, let's not kid ourselves. Bo Nix has won some big games for Auburn in his career at Auburn. He's lost some big games. He hasn't been good in some games, but he's been able to win sometimes. And sometimes winning is the most important thing. I think it is the most important thing when it comes to college football. I really like TJ Finley. I hope he gets his shot wherever he goes. There's a couple other schools in contention. I see like Mississippi State. I see like Arkansas up there. I see Penn State and Michigan being also another alternative. I think he could start at Auburn. I really, really do. I feel like you get a new coach and you want to make a splash and do something, get a guy from the transfer portal, start him and make him into a good quarterback and just bring some kind of new identity to this Auburn offense instead of having Bo Nix out there all the time. I think will be exciting for the fans. Ultimately, right now, if I had to say if Bo Nix and TJ Finley would both go in a quarterback battle right now, I think Bo Nix would win just from what I've seen personally. Although I'd like to see TJ Finley more because I feel like it's new and exciting, and I feel like a lot of fans would. I still feel like Bo Nix right now would maybe be the better quarterback in this scenario. But could TJ Finley start at Auburn, which was our initial question? I think 110% if he does decide to transfer to Auburn. He could go and do something really, really special at Auburn in Brian Harsin's first season and really get that Auburn Tigers train rolling for what they're expecting in the future. So that is our first segment, everyone. Let's see. Who do we got in the comments? Before we go out and get into our next topic of what will JT Daniels have to do to win the Heisman. We got JH Sports saying, hi, JH Sports, what is going on? We got Cole Converse saying, most likely to happen in 2021. West Division wins the Big Ten. That is, that's an interesting comment. I like that. So you're saying like Wisconsin's going to take it. I agree that Ohio State isn't the same beast that they used to be, or they're not as good as they were last year. So I'm looking at like a Wisconsin. I'm looking at like maybe even a Northwestern, Iowa. They all have a chance for the West, and they all have a chance for the Big Ten. So very interesting comment there. Coastal Division wins the ACC. I'm not. Who's in the Coastal? I still have no clue. I need to work on my divisions in the ACC. I'm not that good at that. See, school not located in Oklahoma or Texas will win the Big 12. That is a really, really bold statement, but I could see it happening. Iowa State is definitely the team to do that there. I think my Big 12 rankings right now go Oklahoma, then I have Iowa State, then I have Texas. So it can happen. I feel really, really good about where Oklahoma is at as a program right now, but it could happen. Iowa State could still be a good team. West champ other than Bama, Texas A&M. I think that if Alabama isn't as good as we think that they all are this season, I see there's so many different teams that could win the West next season. Obviously, Texas A&M is going to be the front runner for that. Then you're going to have, I say LSU talent-wise is there. They still got a lot to figure out, but they have the talent to win the West next season. If Alabama isn't up to par and they can compete with Texas A&M, I think Ole Miss would still have a chance and slight edge to Arkansas. But going to your next question of which do I think is most likely out of all of those ones that you just said, I am going to go with, this is a tough one. Oh, and last one, you said group of 5 team makes the college football playoff. I mean, I would love to see a group of 5 team like a Cincinnati next season. I think Cincinnati's definitely one of the better teams in college football. It's just so much needs to happen for a group of 5 team to be able to make the playoff. Like, you're going to have every conference champion in the Power 5 have at least one loss, and then the group of 5 team be undefeated. It's going to be very tough. But if I would have had to pick which one do I think is most likely to happen, in my opinion, you're putting me on the spot, Cool. I actually like the West Division wins the Big Ten one. I mean, the East Division, I honestly don't think is that strong this season. Ohio State's obviously going to be there, but after that, Michigan is coming off a terrible season last year. I think Penn State will rebound a bit, but I don't think that they'll get back to being one of those like top 6 teams in the country. I look at Indiana's probably also there for the best teams in that division. And then after that, you have Michigan State, you have Rutgers, you have Maryland, and you have, who am I missing? Who am I missing out of there? You have Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan, Maryland, Rutgers, and Indiana. Okay, so I said all of them. Yeah, so I like that West Division 1. I think Iowa's going to be a contender this year for the West. I think Wisconsin's probably the most favorite, and I think even Northwestern. And I don't know about Minnesota. I don't think Minnesota. I think maybe Nebraska might have a shot, but I really, really like Wisconsin, Iowa, and Northwestern, and maybe one of those teams could upset Ohio State because, like I said, Ohio State's losing a lot. Yes, they bring in a lot of talent at the quarterback position, but I think they could be a beatable team this year. So out of all those ones, I would say A is the most likely. Great question, Cole. Great question. Okay, now that brings us to our second segment. And today we are going to talk some more Georgia Bulldogs football, and more importantly, focusing in on JT Daniels because there are a lot of Georgia Bulldog fans who feel strongly that JT will win the Heisman this year. A lot of people, even non-Georgia Bulldog fans, a lot of people feel really, really strongly that JT is a serious Heisman contender, definitely a finalist. People definitely think he's a finalist, but can he actually win? If I'm going through the sports book I use, my bookie, I just picked a random one. My bookie right now, here are their odds. They have Spencer Rattler plus 350. They have Bryce Young plus 550, and then they have DJ Uiagalelei plus 700, and then tied for third with DJ, they have JT Daniels at plus 700. I mean, also in this conversation, you'd have guys like Sam Howell would be there, obviously. You're going to have like running backs like Breece Hall will probably be there, Isaiah Spiller, Kevin Harris was in there. I look at other quarterbacks, probably. I don't know about Desmond Ridder. He could probably be in that scenario. Matt Corral could be in that scenario. There's a ton of different quarterbacks that could be in this Heisman race, but those are kind of the four guys that you look at. And add Sam Howell to that. I think he was like plus 1,200. Look at those five guys right there, and those are my most probable Heisman winners for next season, 110%. What will JT Daniels have to do to be able to win the Heisman? That's what we're going to talk about here. And what I did before I want to talk into what JT will have to do, I took every quarterback that has won the Heisman since the playoff era has begun. So obviously that's starting with Marcus Mariota, and that will finish with Joe Burrow. Even if a quarterback won last season, I don't think I was going to count it because it was a shortened season, and that would kind of skew how the data looks and everything. But I went up and I went through each of the averages of all those quarterbacks since the playoff era has begun. So the five quarterbacks that we're going to be talking about that went into making this data that I have right here: Marcus Mariota, Lamar Jackson, Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray, and then finishing off with Joe Burrow, obviously the most recent quarterback to win a Heisman, obviously out of LSU. So here are the stat averages out of those five guys for their seasons. By the way, this does include playoff and bowl games and conference championship games and all stuff like that, even though this year we are going to have the conference championship games before the voting ends, which last year I'm pretty sure was the opposite, just because of how late the conference champions went. But I think this season, you're going to have tons and tons and tons of time to be able to figure out who is, and you're going to be able to have the meaningful out of conference games to determine who is going to win the Heisman. And that's really, really going to help JT Daniels' case, in my opinion. So let's not talk about that. Let's get back to the stat averages from each of these Heisman quarterbacks. First of all, touchdowns. On average, these five quarterbacks threw for 43.4 touchdowns in those, I think all of them would have had at least 14 games. Kyler and Baker would have had 14. Actually, I think Lamar only had 13 games because they didn't win the division, I'm pretty sure, that season, and they did not make the playoffs. So I think they would have only had 13 games when you add in their bowl game. Marcus Mariota had 15, Joe Burrow had 15, and then Kyler and Baker would have only had 14 because they did not make the national championship. So there's a bit of game gap there, but it's only 2 games. So 43.4 touchdowns on average for these five quarterbacks, 4,531 yards passing for each backs, 6.4 interceptions on average, and then average completion percentage of 68.1. I think you look at, this is taking away the rushing stats. So obviously you're going to have an outlier in Lamar Jackson. I think Lamar only had like 32 passing touchdowns or something like that. Obviously he had way more rushing. Obviously he had way more yards rushing. Obviously he had way more attempts rushing than all these other quarterbacks, which many of these quarterbacks, like you look at Joe Burrow and Baker, yes, they were still able to run and everything, but they threw the ball a lot more than they were running. It's just how it worked with them. So Lamar is kind of an outlier. He kind of skewed this. Also, Joe Burrow was an outlier. I mean, the guy threw 60 touchdowns. I think Kyler and Baker were somewhere around the 42, 43 mark. And I think Mariota was also around that. I think he was like 40, 41, something like that. Lamar was 32, and then Joe Burrow was 60 with his. So those are each of the touchdowns that each of those guys threw. I can't remember the yards and everything for each of them, but those were the averages that I just called out for you guys. What will JT Daniels need to be able to win the Heisman? I have all the stats here. I have what I think he'll need to do stat-wise, and then I think he'll also have to do playing-wise. And the success of Georgia and how Georgia does next season, I think will actually play a big, big role into JT Daniels' ultimate fate with the Heisman Trophy, because I think it does. For like, you look at many of these quarterbacks, take out Lamar Jackson. Like Lamar Jackson, they didn't make the playoffs. He still won the Heisman. Joe Burrow, national champion. Kyler Murray makes the playoffs. Baker Mayfield makes the playoffs. Marcus Mariota makes the national championship. And the playoffs don't matter for the Heisman because the Heisman is already determined before the playoffs. So just making the playoff alone and winning your conference championship and everything like that plays a huge role into how Heismans are determined most of the time. So what I have for JT Daniels to win the Heisman, I'll go through the stats first. I think he needs at least 4,250 yards passing to be able to win the Heisman. You look at the average, 4,500 for the last couple of Heismans. I think that this should be a record, or this should be something that would be easily obtainable for JT Daniels. It's nothing out of the water if you want to be a Heisman level quarterback. 4,250 yards passing for JT Daniels. I'm going to go 45 plus touchdowns. The average was 43.4. I think JT, especially with what he has at Georgia this season, could go for over that. I think he could touch 50 touchdowns next season, depending on how well he does. But I think at least 45 would put you in a really, really good spot for winning this Heisman Trophy. Completion percentage, the average was 68.1. I'm going 70 plus for JT Daniels. If you're able to throw 70 plus completion percentage, you're going to really, really stand out to the voters and everything like that. So that's what I say for the completion percentage. And then interceptions doesn't really matter as long as you're able to perform at those other three stats and not have some insane interception. Like if he throws 40 touchdowns and 40 interceptions, obviously that's crazy, but he's not going to win the Heisman. I think anything below like 12, as long as he puts up good stats for all the other three quarterbacks, I think interceptions doesn't matter and he'll be just fine with interceptions. Now with the Georgia Bulldogs success, how do I think that this plays into JT Daniels' ability to win the Heisman? I think JT as a player and as a team and as a leader on the Georgia Bulldogs needs one key and elite win for this Georgia Bulldogs team next season to be able to win the Heisman, because ultimately at the quarterback position, you are the leader of the team. You are the guy leading the team towards success, and getting big wins is something that each and every of these players had going in to the playoffs or bowl season or whatever you want to call it. You look at Joe Burrow. I mean, he went to Texas, won there, went to Alabama, won there, beat Florida, had multiple big wins all throughout the season, beat Georgia in the conference championship. Of course, you look at Kyler Murray, obviously winning the conference there. Baker Mayfield beats Ohio State on the road. You look at Lamar Jackson. Yes, they lost to Clemson, but they still beat number 2 Florida State at the time. Yes, Florida State doesn't finish the season that good, but you still beat the number 2 team in the country. And then Marcus Mariota, obviously beating Florida State in the playoffs and everything like that. And Oregon was one of the best teams in all of college football. So getting key wins is something that all of these quarterbacks have in common. So I think that there's a difference between Georgia going out and beating, let's say, Auburn. Auburn's a rival. It's a big game, but I wouldn't say it's an elite win for Georgia. I wouldn't say games like, who else do they have on their schedule? Like all the East teams. You have, who's their other West team this season? They have Auburn, and then they have, can't remember who their other West team is. Crap, drawing a blank there. But like, I wouldn't say Tennessee is a big win. I wouldn't say like Kentucky, South Carolina, Vanderbilt, Missouri. Any of those guys are massive elite wins. I'm trying to think who they play out of the West. I wouldn't say Georgia Tech is an elite win for them. Who do they play out of the West? I can't remember, guys. I'm drawing a blank here. I apologize, but here are the three teams that I have Georgia playing that I would consider as an elite win. Obviously, Clemson, week 1 in Charlotte, is going to be a massive, massive game to shape the college football playoff picture in general. I think it's definitely the biggest game that has an impact on that. I think winning that game, if JT Daniels wins that game straight up, I think he boosts himself to the Heisman favorite, hands down. Just after that game, after that Saturday, they'll be the Heisman champion. He'll be the front runner for the Heisman. I have Alabama or the SEC West champion, so most likely going to be Alabama if you're able to win the conference championship. That will look great for JT because the conference championship is right before the Heisman voting ends, or an SEC West champion. So I'm looking like Texas A&M, I'm looking LSU, whoever the best team is out of the SEC West. I will say that is an elite win if they're able to win the conference championship. And I have maybe Florida. I have Florida with a question mark. It all depends on how Florida does this year. I still have not wrapped my head fully around what I am confident in Florida being this season. It's a rivalry game. It's a big game. Don't get me wrong, but is Florida going to be at the level as Clemson and Alabama this season? I honestly can't say. So that's why I have a question mark on those one. But I think definitely if you beat Clemson or you win the conference championship, you are going to have that one elite win. He needs at least one. He can have a loss under his belt. I say he can lose to Clemson and still win the SEC championship and still easily be in the Heisman race for sure. He could beat Clemson, lose to Alabama in the SEC championship. Obviously, that would boost Bryce Young's stock a lot, but I still think he'd be in there. I just think that you have to beat at least one of those teams. You can't lose to all of them. You can't lose to Clemson and Alabama and then still win the Heisman. That's just my opinion. So that is what I have for JT Daniels to be able to win the Heisman next season. So that is segment number 2, guys. I'm going to take a short break, and then when we get back, we will have our Tennessee versus Pitt best versus the rest segment. So stick around, guys. I will be right back. Well, I'm out taking a drink of water and catching my breath to bring you guys some more amazing content. Let me tell you how you guys can contribute to the TDSTOHRS brand. Number 1, as easy as it sounds, nothing helps us out more than your constant support through watching the videos, liking the videos, being subscribed, and commenting. Your engagement is what is most important to us here at TDSTOHRS, and we appreciate your support. Number 2, channel memberships. Down below next to the subscribe button, you will see a button that says join. Click it to join one of our 2 tier levels. Each tier level comes with exclusive emojis and badges, and the upper tiers get exclusive content not available to other subscribers. Payments are monthly, and memberships start at $2.99 a month and only go up to $5.99 a month. 3. In the description, there will be a link for direct contributions to the channel. This is completely voluntary, and the funds you decide to forward us will be used to improve the quality of our content. Your support to the TDSTOHR brand means the world to us, guys, because without you guys, there is no channel. So this is our channel. Thank you for your constant support, and now let's get back to some great content. Let's continue on with the show. We are back, finishing off with our best versus the rest segment, and today we have Tennessee versus Pitt, week 2. Pat Narduzzi's team will travel to Rocky Top, and I apologize, Tennessee fans, because I've been called out so much in all of my most recent videos for saying Vols instead of Vols. I apologize for that. It's my Canadian accent. My bad. I'll start calling them the Vols from now on and not put that Ols accent on the back of it. But whatever. Week 2, Pitt travels to Tennessee. And this is one, I talked about this game in my Tennessee early 2022 or 2021 prediction, and I picked Tennessee to beat as an automatic win against Pitt, and so many people argued with me, not just Pittsburgh fan. There was a lot of Tennessee fans who disagreed with me that Tennessee was going to go out and beat the Pitt Panthers next season. And that's what I want to talk about today, kind of taking a second look at this game, gone more in depth in this game and everything. So I'm excited to bring you guys the best versus the rest segment, breaking down Tennessee versus Pitt. It's going to be an amazing, amazing segment. But also, just dropped my new Tennessee North to South Show hats. I got just the classic one, the show one here. Go get your Tennessee ones now. They'll be $25 in our store, which you can click the link in our bio or hit the little notification up above. So Pitt last season went 6-5, and on the road they went 2-3. Pitt last season, they got ranked, I'm pretty sure, They were ranked at points in the season. I think that they had a big win against Louisville. I think Louisville was probably their biggest win because Louisville was ranked at the time, but they struggled against Clemson. They struggled against Notre Dame. They got kicked pretty good by Notre Dame. And all in all, in the ACC, they were just an average team. They finished, I think they finished 6th in their division or something like that. It was a not bad season. Or it might have been 6th in the conference. It was a not bad season for Pat Narduzzi and his Pitt Panthers squad. So let's break in what Pitt is going into this season and how they're looking into the season, what they lost last year. So Pitt lost most of their talent on the defensive side, especially. You look at the defensive line and you look at the secondary. The D-line was one of the most successful in the country last season in getting to the quarterback in tackles for losses. People just didn't talk about them because, again, Pitt isn't one of those big time programs, but this D-line got after the quarterback and they got after the running back behind the line of scrimmage. I tell you that. Patrick Jones and Rashad Weaver, and then Jalen Twyman. Even though Jalen Twyman did opt out last season, Weaver and Jones, I think combined for, I can't remember how many sacks they had. I think it was like 16.5 sacks that they combined for, but they were really dynamic as a duo on that D-line. And they were by far the two best players. And Twyman the season before had a really good season. So losing those 3 guys on the defensive line and the lack of depth that they have behind that at Pitt is going to be a really hard thing to rebuild over there for Pitt next season. You also look at the secondary, and they take massive hits, losing DeMar Hamlin, they lose Paris Ford, and they lose Jason Pinnock. They lost a ton on their defense. Although they do have all these losses, I think that they definitely have one of the better players in all of the ACC, and I do mean all the ACC, and Cam Bright at the linebacker position. He could go out and he could be the defensive player of the year in all of the ACC this season. Now, you look at guys, obviously, you think the best defensive player in all the ACC, you instantly think of the guys at Clemson, the D-line at Clemson, but I tell you, Cam Bright could be up there for that ACC Defensive Player of the Year spot easily, 110%. You look at this offense. The offense is really confusing to me because I think it's a one dynamic offense. I think that this offense really pinpoints the throwing. You look at the rushing game last year for Pitt. They had one game with a rusher over 100 yards, and that was Vincent Davis against Georgia Tech, who I think rushed for like 237 yards, something like that. But other than that, him and AJ Davis, their 2 running backs, did not have any big games. Like, you look at the stat lines for all those games, they're top rusher for all those games. Sometimes it was AJ Davis, sometimes it was Vincent Davis. I keep getting them confused because they have the same last name. It is so confusing. But they only had one game with a rusher over 100 yards. So that tells you that this passing game is the big factor for Pitt in this season. Apologize, got to get some water in me. It's been a long day of talking. So Pitt is really going to rely on Kenny Pickett and how he does at the quarterback position this year, because that was kind of where Pitt scored the most and got down the field the most, was in the passing game. Last year, Pickett only threw 13 TDs and he threw 9 interceptions last year. So Pitt as a whole wasn't a really scoring juggernaut. They weren't a team that really intimidates you with throwing the ball and running the ball and scoring, running up the scoreboard on you. But what they did do really well is defense. And as I talked before, they take a lot of hits on that defensive side of the ball. I think you look at the running back position. I said it again, AJ Davis and Vincent Davis are going to have to step up. Someone's going to have to be the main guy and really work on this Pitt rushing game. I think the offensive line took a big hit on the interior guys that they lost. So as a whole, the rushing game for Pitt isn't looking that strong this season. But I look at the receiving game, and this is where I think most Pitt fans and people who follow Pitt would be optimistic. You look at guys like Jordan Addison. He was the main receiver, breakout freshman last year for Pitt. I think he's going to be the main guy this season. And then I also look at, especially watching the spring game, which I turned on some of the highlights of the Pitt spring game, Tasir Mack is another guy that I feel really optimistic about in this Pitt receiving core to be that big guy for Pickett this season. So those 2 guys I think are going to be the main guys for this receiving core for Pitt. But again, just talking about the defense again, the talent that they have under the guys that they lost, all those guys that I already mentioned. You look at Deslin Alexandre, you look at AJ Woods, and you look at Eric Howlett. as the main guys to replace those guys that I talked about in the secondary and on the D-line. So what do I think of Pitt this season? I think that they're just going to be another average ACC team. And a lot of people feel strongly that this Pitt team is good enough to go out and beat Tennessee next season. So that's what I'm going to get into. My keys for Tennessee to win this game. I'm looking for a huge game for Tennessee offensively. Whoever's the quarterback at this point, I think it's definitely between Harrison Bailey and Hendon Hooker. We could even see Joe Milton. I think that Mauer's out of the picture, but that's just my opinion. Whoever's at the quarterback, this is their game to cement their starting role as the starting quarterback for Tennessee next season. The secondary's weak. Their D-line just got a lot weaker. Their linebacker core is good, but as a quarterback, this is your game to have a big game passing and overall just put up a lot of points on the board for Tennessee and have Tennessee Vols fans very, very excited for the rest of Josh Heupel's career at Tennessee. I think that this is a huge game. It's week 2. I think you play an easier team week 1. I can't remember who it was. I think it's like Texas Tech or something, or Tennessee Tech or something like that. But this is your first big game, out of conference game. Whoever is at quarterback, I think, has to have a big, big game. I think Jones needs to have a huge game in the receiving game. I think he's going to be a guy in this game with the secondary a bit weaker, going out and really picking apart this defense. I think Tennessee's going to take huge advantage of that. Get after Pickett in the quarterback position. He's not the most mobile guy ever. I think he only rushed a couple times last season, and when he does rush, he only averages like 2.2 yards a game or something like that. Get to him at the quarterback position because their O-line, again, is a lot weaker than a lot of people think they are. I think if Tennessee gets after the quarterback, they have a big game for their own quarterback, whoever that is, whether it's Hooker, whether it's Harrison Bailey. I think that they could go out and have a massive game here. All in all, I think that Tennessee is still going to win this game. I'm going to stay true to what I said in my 2021 Tennessee predictions and say Tennessee will go out and beat Pitt this season. My score prediction is 38-31 for Tennessee. Now, in that video, I did say that this was going to be an automatic win for Tennessee. Do I think it's going to be an automatic win for Tennessee still? No. I'd give Pitt a lot more credit than what I gave them in that video, but ultimately I still feel really, really strong that Tennessee will come out with a win in this game. It's an out-of-conference game. It's a game that many Volunteers fans are going to be excited for because it's kind of the start of Heupel's career, because it's your first big game of his whole tenure at Tennessee, however long that is. And I'm expecting Neyland Stadium to be packed, like full capacity crowd, and the fans are just going to have a great time. So I'm taking Tennessee 38 and the Pitt Panthers 31. So that is all for the show today, guys. So we'll take some fan questions. We got one from Auburn Football Highlights here. What am I thinking about Tank Bigsby going into the 2021 season? This is a very interesting question because I think that the running back position all in all in the SEC is absolutely stacked everywhere. I think Auburn definitely has a very, very high-powered rushing game, with obviously Tank Bigsby being the freshman of the year last year. And then Shivers, I think, is also a really, really good player. I think he's going to be at least top 5 in rushing in all of the SEC. You look at guys, I think South Carolina, obviously I'm a big South Carolina fan, and that plays kind of into my bias of how I feel about the room. But Kevin Harris and Marshawn Lloyd, I feel really strong about this year. I think Texas A&M, all in all, has the best rushing game in the SEC in their room. With Ashton, you have Isaiah Spiller, and then you have Anais Smith. I think Georgia also has a really good one, but I think Tank Bigsby is still going to be one of the best running backs in all of college football and definitely one of the best in the SEC, 110%. So that's what I think about Tank Bigsby going into this season. Great question. Anyone else? Anyone else? And if not, we will wrap up the show. Well, it looks like that's it. So thank you guys for tuning in. Those of you who did turn in. If you missed anything, I will post all of the segments that I did tomorrow for the video. But other than that, enjoy the rest of your day, guys, and come back next time.